There's nothing, I don't, for me, there's just creatively, like, nothing quite like it, because, you know, it's like depression or something. I think when you are in it, when you're not writing anything, and when you feel like you can't write anything, there's this terrifying, you know, sort of prospect of, like, oh my God, I'll never write anything again. You know, like, it's so hard to convince yourself otherwise. But ultimately, you're, you know, I don't know, hanging out with friends like a week later, and you think of an idea, and you're like, oh God, it's still there. Like, it's sort of, because I don't know, I mean, I guess you can learn how to write certain kind of jokes, kind of monologue jokes and stuff like that, but, you know, if you've never, if that's not how you're taught, if you weren't taught to write, and you weren't taught how to do comedy, and it's just sort of organic, when it goes away, you're like, I don't know how to get it back. Maybe it'll never come back, you know? Like, maybe I'm done. Like, what's a new job I could look into? Like, and so, yeah, that's terrifying, you know? But it's just part of it. I think it's easier to write for other people, actually. I mean, to write a lot for other people, you know, to write a sort of it's, I don't know, yeah, it's definitely easier for me to sit down and write all day for somebody else. But I like writing for myself more, even though I don't get as much written. But you're not as restricted. It's like having, you know, it's like when you write something and you don't know if it's funny or you don't know if it's good, and you have to kind of hand it off to this sort of objective set of eyes to look at it and go like, okay, that is good. Because, like, I'm my own harshest critic, I know that. But at the same time, you know, I'm not nearly as hard on myself when I'm writing for another person. You know, I feel like I'm going to give them a page of stuff anyways, and they're going to whittle it down or narrow it down, and, you know, and you're not, you also don't have the pressure of having to go up on, I guess, on the stage and, you know, prove that it's funny. It's like, if it bombs or it kills, it doesn't really affect you much. Normally, if I go out and I don't do well, it's not doing well, unless it's like, you know, an open mic or something where I'm testing new material, it's usually not doing well with jokes that have done well in the past. So you kind of go, you chalk it up to like, well, they, you know, I'm not their cup of tea, and, you know, kind of move on. And sometimes, I mean, sometimes shows are so bad that that's funny, that's sort of the redeeming quality of the show, is like, oh my God, that was terrible. It's sort of this, you know, ironic acceptance of the entire evening of like, well, what are you going to do, you know? I'd almost rather have silence than, like, you know, a handful of polite chuckles. But it doesn't affect me as much at all, you know? I don't know, I guess I figured, like, all you can really do is what you do, and like I said, like, sometimes I'll, you know, try to chit-chat with the audience and make them like me, but at the same time, I'm not, you know, all of my self-esteem isn't invested in how well I do on stage. And, you know, there was a time where it was, I guess, more so. I mean, I've had some fun gigs. I kind of was lucky to avoid, not lucky even actually, because I'm kind of doing it backward. I was lucky to avoid the road hell, you know, like a lot of people have hell gigs, you know, stories from the road, and I because I started writing fairly quickly out of college, I didn't really do the road in that capacity, you know, where I was just like in a car driving, you know, 9 hours a day, and, so I missed out on a lot of that. I did have like a, you know, I did like a one-nighter in like Northern California, where, you know, it was like a pizza joint, and we were staying at the house of the guy who owned the pizza joint, and, you know, sort of, it was me and Henry Phillips and Chris Fairbanks, and we ended up like this guy's house, and we're like, it was like the mother was very nice, but she was like, you guys are sleeping in here, and it was like me and my friend had to share like a twin bed, and they pulled off like a drunk teenager off the bed, and he vomited in the hallway, and we're trying to sleep, and there's like all this commotion, like, you know, there's always stuff like that, but at the same time, the show was fun, you know. I mean, the worst gigs are really the gigs where, you know, you feel like you've almost wasted your time because nobody likes you, and then you're like, well, who did that help? When I went out with Neil Hamburger, we on the road, we there was a couple of nights where bands played before or after us, and or in between, and that's really fun. I think it's if you're paired with the right kind of music, or you're paired, at the right kind of club, there's this weird sensibility that goes like Posehn gets a lot of metal guys at the shows. They love him and love his comedy and love metal, and it's like there's this sensibility that's sort of I don't know, that's sort of a part of a certain kind of music and a certain kind of comedy. It's like, I know Eugene Merman opens for a lot of like the Sub Pop bands and stuff, and like that's a perfect fit. Like if it's the right band, it's great because it also seems like a variety show. It's kind of it's like a new sort of, it's new and sort of old fashioned at the same time, and but if it's a band, if it's a band where their crowd hates comedy, then that's awful. But I don't know. Somebody came up to me after I opened for a band, and they weren't expecting stand up, and someone just came up and was like, and I said this on stage, but they just said, I thought they were going to compliment me, like they seemed really happy, and they just went like, this is a girl, she just goes, "You are so brave." And it's like a weird sort of, it's a half compliment, it's a compliment, but not at all of what you were trying to achieve on stage. You're like, well, thank you, but that wasn't my point. I wasn't, setting out to prove how brave I was. But if that's what you took away from it, then good for you. I know Bobcat. He knew me from working at Kimmel. I was a writer on Kimmel, Jimmy Kimmel Live, and Bobcat was the director. And he wrote this movie and was going to shoot it, and said, I have this part for you, and we were able to work it out so that I could do it and shoot a couple of days. So that was really fun. I mean, it's a really small part, but Brian Posehn's in it as well as a bigger part, and is hilarious. Like, so many funny lines. But yeah, it's a small part, and it was a blast. And it was this weird sort of, the most independent of independent productions, and it got into Sundance, and now it's coming out in, sort of the art house theaters, and so all sort of exciting. Yeah, I want to record a CD. They recorded all the Comedians of Comedy sets, which aren't quite long enough for. I want to record a full thing at once, as opposed to cobbling together, a couple of different 20-25 minute sets. But yeah, that's definitely in the works. I thought about even. It's funny, when I went out with the Comedians of Comedy, I thought I'll put something together to have something to sell at the shows, but I really want the first thing I record and sort of press to be something that I'm somewhat proud of. So I'm just gonna try to just keep doing shows, and then hopefully try to book some longer sets out of town to record something like that. But and then hopefully bring in friends and stuff. I've talked to a couple different people about just doing little bits and trying to make it interesting. It's like Dimitri's CD, incorporates a lot of different stuff. And I'd like to do something somewhat non-traditional, but it's always hard, because especially if you've seen a lot of comedy, you go oh God, it's such a struggle to not just be unique, but to convince yourself that you're unique. Is even harder, because
sense of satisfaction.
Yeah. That's the sense of satisfaction is definitely hard to come by. But when when you do have it, there's not a lot to compare to it. It's pretty great, but it's also elusive. Say hi to the camera.
Hello, camera.
I've been interviewed where people were what? How did you use comedy when you were a kid and stuff like that? I don't know. I don't think I ever did. You know me better than that by now. I mean, I could have used props and been hey, I don't know, don't feel like talking right now.